Hi, I'm Pruvulekere, brand and marketing strategist and the writer at thecleantask.com. This video section of the blog is where we meet professionals from various backgrounds and learn from their business and marketing expertise. Today, we're meeting Modupe Oloruntoba, one of South Africa's finest fashion journalists who focuses on the African luxury sector, who has worked with brands like Vogue and Unilever over the past decade. Today, she is the Director of Brand Development at Brothers Beard, a men's personal care brand based in Johannesburg. Let's get to know Modupe better and her favorite business concept. Modupe, welcome to the Clean Tusk. You are my first guest, an incredible fashion journalist and brand consultant from South Africa. We know each other from primary school. We later connected at South African Fashion Week and have followed each other closely since. You started your career studying fashion design, but you always knew that you were drawn to fashion journalism. Tell me how you transitioned into your dream role.
Okay, so I don't know that it was transitioning or having to kind of build the dream role piece by piece over the years. But yes, I studied fashion design, and initially the plan was to be a designer. And in third year, I'd have, I don't know if I could call it a crisis of some sort, but something about design just wasn't, or the reality of design after studying it, just wasn't agreeing with me the way I thought it would. So my expectations were very off. And I looked and I thought, what can I do? And I realized, well, I've got this basic writing talent. I pass my written assignments. I don't struggle with them as much as the other assignments. And yeah, fashion magazines were where I fell in love with fashion. So I thought I'll work at a magazine for a while. I'll see what's possible, what I can do. This was in, my goodness, 2013. So magazines, glossies in particular, were in much better shape than the downward spiral they'd have experienced since then. And so it wasn't an unreasonable thing for me to think. I just thought, okay, I'll start a blog so that I've got like somewhat of a portfolio and get into things that way. I'll dedicate the next few years to content and then I'll see about design. Maybe my mind will change. Maybe I'll have an idea that, I don't know, solves the tension for me. So off I went into, what was the first one? It was like a production coordinator role for a brand new magazine where I got to write a little bit, and then started to work with some brands where I got to write a little bit more. But yeah, the plan was always just to be in content for a few years. It has now been 10 years. And I just found my lane with it, found my space, found what I love to do. I am invested in and quite honored actually to tell the stories of African brands and to, I guess, help shift perceptions about the value that they have to offer and break it out of the frames or boxes that people would put it in.
That's so interesting. I would say this is more like, as you said, it's not a hard transition. It's more, I'd say, talent stacking in a way. So it's really
Yes.
fascinating because, maybe this is a good follow-up question. Do you think that studying fashion design or the process of, making various articles inspired the details of your work in any way?
I would say that at the beginning of my career, it was definitely very helpful because the combination of like experience with fabrics and patterns and all those elements and vocabulary, having a vocabulary for that was developed and being able to marry that to like the editorial style of writing that I loved in magazines. I think that helped me set my work apart very early on. when I didn't have the strongest portfolio. I didn't have the right internships under my belt. I didn't know the right people to get into certain roles. And I think it did help me set myself apart. Looking back, I thought I wasn't sure it would be as helpful as it was, because I was like, this is technical knowledge. You can put it in an article, but it doesn't really matter to somebody who's like never touched the fabric or worked with it, or but I was just able to use it to make the writing more of a sensory experience, I think. So bring people into the understanding of clothing and what they're putting on. And yeah, I think that was super helpful. I don't know that it did anything more than that. I think that would be about it. I didn't feel like it was the wrong education for what I was doing when I got started, especially because when I got started, the plan was always to go back to design. So yeah, it was an interesting kind of twist about journey. Yeah.
No, awesome. In your early career, you got to work with Elle Magazine's South African headquarters. You reported to the editors-in-chief of Elle and Elle Decor. Paint a small picture for our audience of what that looks like and what were the joys, what were the challenges?
So there is the I want to work at a magazine dream that I think so many millennials grew up with. I don't know if it's just all of the movies that we
Yeah.
watched making being a magazine editor seems so glamorous and so interesting and so cool. Um, I knew things had shifted from that, and obviously that was in the movies, so it was never like a true realistic picture, but it was a picture of something that used to exist in the US. I knew that things were A, not quite the same in South Africa, and B, that things had shifted since then. Like magazines didn't have the kind of budgets to be paying for like a driver for the editor-in-chief to go to 10,000 appointments. So I went in with what I thought were pretty realistic expectations. And I also went in aware of the media landscape at the time. Like a lot was closing down, and it wasn't just print. It was digital magazines. It was, I don't know, the most interesting like multi-platform, omni-channel experiments that just were not picking up steam. So I went in with pretty adjusted expectations, but I don't think anything could have prepared me for what I encountered at Elle, because of what I just boiled down to really, really ill timing. So my very first day at Elle, the editor-in-chief who had just hired me a week or two before called the rest of her team into the boardroom, the conference room, told me to just get settled at my desk, and she resigned. I I just heard gasps coming from the next room,
Oh
and I
my.
was like, "Oh my goodness, did someone die? Like, what's going on?" Um, and yeah, when they came back out of the room, I heard what had happened, and yeah, it just felt like a bad omen.
Oh.
And it kind of was. There was just, I guess, power struggles going on in the publishing structure, combined with the dire straits that most magazines were finding themselves in, losing more and more advertising revenue to Google and Facebook and digital marketing in general. Um, I sat down at my desk and tried to get started and thought, I'll make the best of this. A week or two later, the other person who had been involved in my hiring decision, I'm forgetting what the actual title was. I think it was managing editor. That person resigned as well.
Oh.
And yeah, I was feeling very like a rudderless ship, because we went on for weeks, neither of them had been replaced. And so this was also the Cape Town office, and the team at the time was split across Johannesburg and Cape Town. So a lot of these larger decisions that were affecting us were being made in Johannesburg. But yeah, the reality of them was that these two people left, and honestly, it just felt like chaos.
Oh
because
my.
you need an approval structure, you need an editor. And yeah, it was a little bit difficult. We focused on just keeping the website like churning with new content using syndication from
Mm-hmm.
like the general um, L hub. There's a hub where we can syndicate like, I don't know, things like celebrity news
Mm-hmm.
from L editions in other countries. So we did that. We tried to do as much original work as we could as well. And yeah, I think the print magazine at the time suffered a little bit for maybe two issues. Uh, but yeah, it was just it was quite the experience. We moved offices in the time that I was at L, and that was when we started to actually like share open space with the L decoration team.
Oh wow.
And I guess share more ideas and share more of the workload.
Mm.
And L Decoration did get an editor in that time. Um, L did not get an editor, but the publisher took over the editor seat for the time being.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, doing our best was not working. Um, it was really It was really challenging. And I know that a lot of it was just down to the timing. Like when I arrived was when these things would have happened
Mm-hmm.
either way. Um, but yeah, it was very grounding in realizing that I was not going to walk into a dream scenario
Mm.
at any job, at least not in media anymore. I was going to have to build my dream scenario. And trying to get there was not going to be pretty, it was not going to be perfect. Um, I was going to have to stack things, like you said before. I don't think it was so much talent stacking as knowledge stacking.
Mm.
I just learned as much as possible as I could about the one thing, just the writing and the content.
Got it.
Um, I I didn't know that I was doing it then, even though I knew I needed to build like a new dream. I knew I needed to build a new North Star because being editor in chief of a fashion magazine was not going to be the North Star anymore. Um, and I don't know, as I was contemplating what that should be, I didn't know that I was building the pieces actually
Mm.
of where I would go next. And that freelancing would be my reality for a very long time. After that, with the L situation, it got bad enough that it affected my health.
Oh man.
And so I left 3 months into a 5 month contract,
Wow.
and then went to Woolworths. Woolworths was looking for copywriters at the time
Mm-hmm.
for their fashion beauty home department. And I thought, okay, let me try my hand at copy. That's a skill I can build
Mm-hmm.
because I can write, but everything's been features and editorial up to that point. Some content marketing for the likes of Superbalist and their blog, but no true like advertising copy or product copy or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. So I thought, let me go and hone the skill over there
Mm-hmm.
with a fantastic team. Um, and yeah, I mentioned Woolworths because it was almost the antidote to L.
Wow.
Um, it was such a luxury to walk in every morning, and there's a traffic manager
Oh.
for the marketing team who walks over to my desk in the morning and tells me what my priorities are, tells me what's been moved out, tells me what's new. Um, it was it was like a full body massage after a car
Um,
accident.
that's very
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
but yeah, I really learned a lot through that L experience.
Mm.
And at the time, I really did regret it. And it kind of broke the dream for me
Mm.
because there was the whole editor of a magazine thing, but
Mm.
very specifically of all the glossy brands, L was my brand. And so
Mm-hmm.
it really meant something to me to get to work on that brand. And it was heartbreaking that that became the reality of it. Um, but it really did teach me a lot about like dream jobs and the reality of work. Not that it would be the same for everyone. I'm not trying to be that bitter person saying, don't meet
Mm-hmm.
your heroes, everything's horrible. Um, but yeah, reality can be different than your expectations,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be rough, like it was, or in the aftermath, it can also be wonderful. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I didn't imagine the career path that I've had after that year, after those months at L. That was in 2017, and then
Wow.
I spent pretty much all of 2018 at Woolworths. And
So sorry to cut you off, but for the audience who may not know what Woolworths is one of South Africa's largest apparel retailers, and they also have home category now, as well as kids wear. Um,
mm,
and then you mentioned Superbalist, which is one of South Africa's uh, first apparel retail
cool
online
fashion e-commerce
e-commerce
startups.
retailers. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
really
a
like
little like ASOS, which might
exactly.
be a much more recognizable brand for people.
Yes. Yes, for comparison's sake.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but so interesting to, see how that experience molded you and, then exposed you to the upcoming roles and that the
Mm.
upcoming roles had a, different structure, but something that you, enjoyed more. Um, Moving on, you've also, worked with some of the biggest global brands from Unilever to Vogue. But what I'm deeply interested in is your experience with South Africa's hottest fashion designers, Thebe Magugu and Rich Mnisi. For our audience who may not know these names, Thebe Magugu and Rich Mnisi are South Africa's, finest fashion designers. They're internationally acclaimed, but they tell fantastic stories. Tell
Mhm.
me, what was it like working with such young but highly acclaimed names in fashion?
It was and is, I still work with Rich on a couple of small projects. It's glorious because storytellers just get each other.
Hmm.
So we just got each other, and that's been powerful and really wonderful to enjoy. Thebe is a name that a few more of you might recognize than Rich, because Thebe won the LVMH prize in 2019. I had just moved to Johannesburg in early 2019. I had been Instagram friends with Thebe, and we met up in that year. Actually, I think that was the year he took me to lunch on my birthday, or that must have been the next year. Yeah. But I was also, I guess, in kind of like a quarter life crisis. I took, which is part of why I moved to Joburg, just Cape Town felt like it was an ill-fitting sweater at the time. And I just needed some change. And I was like,
Hmm.
what change is within my control? And it was moving to Joburg. So I moved, and also at the same time as moving, made the decision to spend everything that I wasn't spending moving on a trip to London.
Wow.
Uh, this was also supposed to be kind of a working trip. I would have I would have been doing some freelancing for the new team at Elle Magazine that had taken over around the time that I'd left. But that would also be the month that Elle South Africa folded for good. So yeah, life comes at you fast. You never know what to expect. I was in London at the same time as Thebe. Thebe was there to exhibit as part of, he was one of the finalists for the International Fashion Showcase. And he was exhibiting at Somerset House along with the other finalists. So he'd invited me to like the opening night of the exhibit, and I met up with him at his hotel, and we were meeting for the first time in person in like this in this tiny foyer of like a dark hotel in London, um, and went up to his room just to look through some of the clothes that he'd brought with him. And he dressed me for the night, actually put me in a Thebe Magugu, I think it was a dress and a coat, or was I wearing my own dress? I can't remember. But I had silver boots with me on this trip that I just, when you pack for a trip and you pack for like a completely different person than you actually are 9 to 5, those silver boots were exactly that for me. And we left the hotel, we walked down to Somerset House because it was very close by. The freezing cold actually cramped up my legs in those boots, and I like crumpled on the ground in the street in a Thebe Magugu coat. It was very funny. We got to the opening night of the exhibition and I got to see everyone's work. It was really, really incredible work from all of the finalists. But a few days later, I also got to be there when Thebe was presented with the prize, when he won the International Fashion Showcase. And it just felt like I was witnessing something so special for African fashion. And then when the ceremony was over, Thebe was on the phone just outside the building with his mom and his family, telling them how things had gone. And after he got off the phone with them, he told me that another phone call that he'd recently received was the call from the LVMH prize, that he had made the semifinals. And from there, it was just like skyrocket. And it's been so incredible to watch. He's the nicest, kindest person and has been completely unchanged by that. But he's also such a determined and focused storyteller. And it's been amazing to kind of get a front row seat to that. I was a few weeks ago at the opening of Thebe Magugu House, and I got to walk through his new space, his flagship space, and it's been incredible to watch. And I hope that more of the same comes for a lot more African designers. Rich and Thebe are friends, but Rich is a very different type of storyteller than Thebe, and he leans into dreams and mythology and symbolism,
Yes.
whereas Thebe leans into a lot of history, untold history. So working with Rich is interesting because a lot of the source material just doesn't exist. And it's that he had a dream or his mother had a dream, and he turned that into a collection and now needs basically just an assist in articulating it for other people who aren't like completely inside the process or inside his head where the dream took place. And yeah, that's really been incredible. With Rich in particular, it's been amazing because the briefs are holding so little information, and I thought that would be frustrating for me, but he gets me, I get him, and he trusts me so much, which is just, it's the absolute best from any kind of client, any kind of project. To be given trust is really great, and I don't take the trust for granted, and I try to just do my best with that. They're fantastic people, and they're fantastic designers. And it's been a real pleasure having that front row seat to what they're doing and to them getting to do it in this time where African fashion is really just taking off, finally getting some of the acclaim that it deserves. And yeah, I think in particular, it's also been interesting to watch both of them hold on to their identity in collaborations. Rich does a lot more collaborations than Thebe does, or he has in the past. He has a longer history of collaborations. But both of them have worked with Adidas. Rich has a furniture collaboration, a sculptural art furniture collaboration with the Southern Guild, and I've gotten to help with the messaging around some of that a little bit as well. And yeah, it's just been amazing to watch the strength of them, of what they do, not get diluted by scale. Because I think that happens to a lot of storytellers, and it's not just an African fashion thing. They've managed to increase scale, perhaps like not to the level that some people think it should be on, or we're such an instant generation, people forget that things take time. But yeah, it's been amazing to watch like the core identity that makes them special and that has made them special from day one. It hasn't changed. And it hasn't gone anywhere, even with all of the maturity, with all of the scale, the redirection, the growth, and I don't know, the 10,000 paths that growth can take you on. It's that I think is what's been most inspiring for me about the two of them. Yeah,
It's so fascinating that you were literally got to witness history unfold,
it
through
still gives me
relationships.
goosebumps. I have a video of Thebe receiving the prize. It's a horrible video, um, but it takes me back to that moment every time. I think I'll try and share it with you if that's useful at all.
Absolutely. I mean, not many people can say that they have, an actual video that they took themselves of a moment in history.
Mm.
So incredibly, fascinating story. But we're,
I feel like I'm talking a lot,
no,
but
but
yeah.
it's so engaging. You put us into those scenes, and that for our audience couldn't be more enriching. Tell me about African Fashion Weekly. It's a platform that you founded which spotlights, news and insights from the African fashion ecosystem. You were also a guest lecturer for Stadio School of Fashion at the Clean Tusk. I love hearing, straight from the professionals and learning from them. Name and explain one concept, theory, or metric that you've worked closely with and why it's important to you. But yes, also tell us a little bit more about African Fashion Weekly.
Okay, so when I say that the pieces of what I wanted to do were coming together over the years, even though I couldn't quite see the whole tapestry, the whole picture yet, the whole tapestry is African Fashion Weekly, or is everything I'd like it to become. Um, I just looked around and we were having the same conversations over and over again in South African fashion.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was the same complaints
Mm,
from season to season, from era to era. Every designer was struggling with the same things. And the common thread in it was that people were building strong brands and weak businesses.
mm,
And what I found was that the rest of the fashion industry, the global fashion industry, they talk about themselves like a business. Here in South Africa and across the rest of Africa, in some ways, we talk about African fashion like it's a charity that needs support,
yeah.
and it is a business. And so I thought I I understand the power of like changing the way that you talk about something and the impact that that can have.
Hmm.
And so I thought, what if there was a space where we can talk about African fashion like it's actually a business, and therefore change people's mindsets around it. We can plug the information and education gaps around the business knowledge that people in the industry need. Um, and we can also show people outside of the industry that African fashion takes itself seriously and is worthy of investment and is not filled with flighty, clueless founders, which I found is the perception
Yes.
of fashion and other creative industries,
Hmm.
from the outside, especially from the world of finance, which is why funding is so, so difficult for these businesses.
It is.
So yeah, African Fashion Weekly was me trying to create a kind of answer to all of that. And it also took time to come together as an idea because I looked at the media landscape and it was so fractured. And it was like, what is the new media thing that is going to work?
Mm,
Because people, this entire time that media was falling apart, people kept consuming content. So
that's
content wasn't the problem. Content would never be the problem. We were never going to stop telling stories and hearing them and, um, I don't know, shaping and curating stories either. So it was about finding the right format. And one day the light bulb went off that it should be a newsletter. Business of Fashion started as a newsletter.
yes.
Vogue Business started around this time that I'd
Yes.
had this idea, and they began as a newsletter before they launched their website. Um, so many of the world's best things were newsletters, and email is still such a powerful channel that was being underestimated at the time. So I'd started a newsletter where I just talked about global and local fashion headlines,
Mm,
that had basically been born from my Instagram stories, where
mhm,
I would just like read off the headlines on Business of Fashion in the morning and explain to people what it meant and all of
mhm.
that. It was a fun little thing that I did on Instagram. That became its own newsletter. And then when the light bulb went off with the African Fashion Weekly idea, it was like, okay, this actually, um, the earlier newsletter had kind of gone to sleep with COVID and George Floyd and a thousand things that made it just horrible to be on the internet at the time. I really struggled. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but when I felt ready to go again, the old newsletter didn't feel right, and the African Fashion Weekly idea did. So I got started very, very scared because as much experience as I have, I don't have business reporting experience. So I had never written a news brief. I had
Mm-hmm.
never written business analysis, even
Mm-hmm.
though on a fundamental principle level, I understood what it
Mm-hmm.
was. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I had started to put the ideas together. I had started to write the newsletters, but I was so frozen on pressing publish. Um, and finally got a few loving and caring voices in my circle to push me over the edge, and got my own voice also to say yes and stop saying no out of fear. And yeah, I hit publish on the very first one. And I've gotten to tell some interesting stories there, I think, but I've also mainly focused on um, bringing people the news that I think they need to know. So
Mm-hmm.
here's some headlines about macroeconomic conditions in Africa that are actually going to affect your business, even though you're like, um, I don't know, a handbag designer
Mm-hmm.
working out of your garage. You need to be connected to this world of business. You think it doesn't affect you, but it does.
Okay.
So I did those news roundups. Um, I started to post careers wherever I could find them. Um, and I took a step back from telling business stories when I realized that I was trying to say everything possible that could be said about a business in one article.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, the article was suffering, but also the reader was suffering. It was too much. It was just way too much. And so that's when I came up with a framework that answers the second part of your question,
Mm-hmm.
um, that I've begun to work closely with the newsletter. And I think it's been it's been quite helpful to give structure to
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing, and to structure also the value so that you know what you're getting out of an article, and I know what I'm giving and what questions I need to ask to get that value into the article. So I just call it CORS, CORS,
Mm-hmm.
challenges, opportunities, resources, strategy. So there's a business I want to cover, there's a reason I want to cover them. Something has happened, or they are doing something interesting. I met the founder at an event and they said something interesting. I first try to find what the angle is. And then based on that angle, I will run through the framework. So, what are the challenges that the business faced
Mm-hmm.
around the time that this was happening? Challenges internally and challenges externally, the stuff that's out of their control. What were the opportunities that were represented? Did these challenges did you have an idea that would be a good answer to the challenge? And then that would represent an opportunity. Or was there a client giving you room to do something new? And in that experiment, you found an answer to the challenge. So trying to find out how people are problem solving between the first two. Then the second two would be, or how people are thinking about problem solving. Because the second two would then be the tactical, practical end of the problem solving. So I'd say in resources, what resources were available to you in terms of your staffing and the kinds of talent that you had on hand, the kind of skills that you already had in your business. And what did you still need, and how were you going to get it? Because a lot of people tell stories of success without saying what resources were available to them. And I think that does everyone a disservice. You have to say if you got funding from a source that nobody else is likely to get, or if you were able to make that first run of t-shirts because you already have manufacturers in your family, or something to that effect. Because there's a lot of that in South Africa, where once you look beyond the veneer of success, there's much fewer people who have kind of fought and hustled and figured out the way to where they are. And there are way more people who know somebody who knows somebody, and were able to access something that isn't available to other people. Or that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that they don't have lessons
Mm-hmm.
or anything about their business to learn, but it's about transparency and saying, yes, this is what happened, but this is what it took.
Mm-hmm.
So after the resources, then we look at strategy. So here's the challenge, here's the opportunity, here's the resources that they had in order to solve this problem or take advantage of this opportunity. And then the strategy is how they actually did it. What decisions were made and how did they pay off? So that's the new structure that I'm trying to put everything in. I have an interview that I just did last week with a wonderful sustainable Cape Town based brand that I'm running through the framework right now. And yeah, it's going to take time to like get it into a structure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think it's also a great framework for thinking about many things. It's a great framework to do alongside a SWOT analysis. If you're thinking about starting a business, you have to think about, okay, what are my challenges? What are the market challenges? What are the opportunities? Does any one of these market challenges represent an opportunity for me and my business to be the solution?
Mm-hmm.
What are the resources at my disposal and how can I best use them? What's the strategy I'm going to employ? And then you can go into giving yourself goals and putting things on a timeline and knowing when you're going to launch and knowing what resources you still need and who you can ask about those things.
Yes.
So yeah, it's become a thinking framework for me that really works quite broadly.
It's really beautiful, really, because it's like an expansion of the strengths and the opportunities part of the SWOT analysis in a way.
Yeah.
But it's very focused, so you can go
Mm.
quite deep into that section.
Yeah,
And
it's the
again,
storytelling version, I think, of a SWOT
yes,
analysis. Yeah.
absolutely. But it also takes into account the vision of a business. So which is where the strategy comes in. It's like the
Mhm.
midpoint between the vision and then the SWOT. So I can't wait to actually use that myself. Thank you
Mhm.
so much for that one. I think it's going to be very useful.
Sure. Yeah, if anyone uses it, I really would love to understand just how broad the applications are. So do let me know if you use it successfully in something.
Mhm. And we're almost near the end, of this interview. Closing off, I want to ask you, what is your message for African fashion or message for the world, or both?
I got to write an essay for Lee Edelcourt's book, Proud South, just about creativity in the global South in general. And I spoke mostly about fashion and mostly about Africa. But I think a lot of what I said applies to the general global South. And in that, it's so weird to like be essentially quoting myself. But there's a quote that Lee in particular loved and has used in promoting the book. And it is basically that the world is coming to Africa, and the world has always come to Africa, but just not on very fair terms. The world is coming to Africa now on a much more even and level playing field. And we, as Africans and as the global North, have taken such ownership of our creative equity, of our creative capital, of our cultural capital in such a beautiful way, I think, over the past decade. And it's completely changed how we're interacting with the world. And essentially, they're still coming to Africa because Africa's got the biggest youth population, Africa's got the growing middle class, Africa's got everything the future needs. And they're going to come to us with the same old terms, essentially. And we are going to welcome their interest, but reject their terms and insist on ours. And I hope that we're brave enough for that to be true. I see it already happening was it the president of Uganda or the president of Kenya who banned
Uganda,
um,
yes, yes,
was
yes. The
Uganda who banned the secondhand imports.
secondhand
I
import.
don't think he should have done it so unilaterally and with no phase out plan, but it was still an incredibly bold move that reflects the changing sentiment that we're just not going to do things on your terms anymore. Transactions, when the global North transacts with the global North, um, they are happy to do deals that work for everyone.
Mm.
Everyone involved is going to fight for the thing that they need, and is going to say this deal has more pros than cons for us, and so we're in. Africa just hasn't been in a position to do that for a very long time, and especially within the creative industries, has not been in a position to do that for a very long time. But now the world's eyes are on us, the world's interest is in us, the world is looking to us for inspiration, the world is looking to us for almost a new playbook and blueprint when it comes to creative execution. And I don't want us to squander that opportunity by interacting with them and transacting with them and exchanging with them the way that we have before, that benefits them and leaves us with nearly nothing. So yeah, I guess my message for African fashion would be bold and be brave in those interactions and those collaborations with global brands, in when they invite you to their stages, make sure that it works for you and it's not just you standing there to make them look good. And the message for the world would be ready to deal with Africa on different terms, because the terms that you're used to just aren't available anymore. You cannot count on that for the future.
Beautiful message. And coming straight from also part of that essay that, you mentioned, I'd love to read that book. I actually haven't. So, let me know
I saw it
after.
for the first time at Thebe's launch, actually. I'd never seen the physical book. So he has a copy because a lot of his work is in the book as well.
Oh, beautiful. I can't wait to look at that. Thank you so much, Modupe, for being my first guest. I couldn't
Thank
have
you for having
asked
me.
I couldn't have asked for a better guest. Also coming from such a similar background as well. I thought it was really fitting to have you on, and so easy to ask you questions and get into the depths of your experience. For the
It's really
audience,
easy to answer the questions. And I can't believe how funny life is that we were in primary school together and here we are now on like opposite sides of the world, but in the same industry and reaching for the same things. It's so cool.
it's so cool. And I mean, how funny that it was 20 years ago, and we've, as millennials as well, we've gone through so many interesting phases to
That
now
we have.
come closer and be clearer on what our goals are. And I think
Mm.
that's a very reassuring place to be in as well. As I said, thank you. It's been phenomenal speaking to you. And I can't wait to meet you again in the future.
Cannot wait to see you. If I'm ever in Seattle, I will let you know.
If you found today's interview enriching and wish to learn more about marketing from various professionals and experts, do subscribe to thecleantask.com. Comment on what you'd like to see next. And for now, I'm Purval Irkere, and until next time, keep learning and keep innovating.